Here are again two Sufi stories. Perhaps you'll remember that story about the king who was totally disillusioned with life at the court, the lies, the deceits, the intrigues, the manipulations. So he decided to seek out a Sufi master. And so he did. But when he came into the presence of the Sufi master gave him the most menial of tasks, the lowest of the low. And after some time, the other students of the master took pity on this ex-king, and they said to their master, "Master, why do you treat him so harshly?" And the master said, "He is not ready, but if you wish, you may test him." So some days later, one of the students, as the ex-king was carrying the trash in 2 buckets to the disposal ground, bumped his elbow so that the bucket emptied out on his feet and on the ground. The ex-king reacted with great anger and glaring at the fellow student, he said, "When I was a king, your head would be lopped for that." So when this was related to the master said, "Well, yes, he is not ready." But then, after some time, the master gave instructions, "Test him again." And again one of the fellow students went and, appearing to accidentally bump him as he was carrying the trash, again it slopped out over his feet, and again he brought himself up to his full height. But not saying anything, he glared fixedly at the student who had bumped him. Then he picked up the rubbish and went on his way. And when this was reported to the master said, "No, he is not ready." But again, some time later, the master gave instructions for him to be tested, and again the same exercise was undertaken. But this time there was absolutely no reaction from the ex-king. He did not flinch, he did not glare, he did not stand up to his full height with any pride. He merely bent down and scooped up the rubbish back into the buckets and went on his way. When this was related to the master said, "Yes, now he is ready. Bring him to me." Then there's a story about a man who, seeking truth, made his way to a Sufi master seeking to become his student. And when he was admitted to the Taqiyya, the Sufi school, you might say, he was given tasks to do, but he was never spoken of directly by the master. And he was not permitted to interact with the other students. But after some while, he decided that this was not for him, so he went to the master to take his leave. And when he did, the master said to him, "Well, what would you like, 3 pieces of advice or money?" And the man said, "Well, I can't eat advice, so I'll take the money." So the master gave him a certain amount of gold and sent him on his way. But it wasn't too long before the man was accosted by bandits and his money was taken from him. But by this time he'd already decided that the Sufi way wasn't for him. So he leaves the story at this point. But then there was another man who came to the Sufi master who happened to be a merchant. And he too was given tasks to do. He was allowed to interact with the other students, but he was never directly addressed by the master in any way. But he stayed for a couple of years, and then he decided that he was a little bit disappointed with things that were happening. So he decided to take his leave. So he went to the master, and the master also said to him, well, what would you like? 3 pieces of advice or gold? And the man considered for a moment. He thought, well, I'm a merchant, I can make money, I know how to do that by trading, I'll take the advice. And so first of all, the master said to him, well, if you have a choice between 2 ways, do not take the easier way, take the harder way. So the merchant kind of scratched his head about this, figuratively speaking. And then the master said, and the second piece of advice is, if you choose to purchase something, choose the smaller and not the larger. So again, the merchant was very perplexed by this, and he thought to himself, well, I don't really consider that these are any worthwhile pieces of advice. And so he said to the master, with all due respect, instead of the 3rd piece of advice, I'll take the money that I would have. So the master said, well, so be it, and he gave him 1/3 of the money that would have been offered to him, and the merchant went on his way. But as he was travelling, the merchant came to a place where there was a choice between taking a shortcut through a tunnel that had been built through the mountain or traversing the mountain. And he remembered what the master had told to him, so he chose to cross the harder way across the mountain pass. And when he came to the other side, he found that the tunnel had collapsed just at the time that he would have been in it. So he was very fortunate to have not met that fate. But he went on and he came to a city, and he decided that he was going to purchase a farm. And to start him off in the farm, he thought he would buy some chickens. So he went to the market, and there was a choice between some rather large chickens and some smaller ones. And the merchant remembered the advice that had been given to him by the master, and he chose the smaller hens, which it turns out were very good layers, and the bigger ones, he found out, didn't lay at all. But he started his farm, but it wasn't too long before a despotic ruler invaded that place and took over the city and usurped his farm and enslaved him, so that he became a galley slave, rowing the oars in the ships that plied between various places. But it so happened that one day one of the travellers on the galley in which he was rowing was one of those ex-students of the master, and recognizing him, the merchant, now a galley slave, said, perhaps I should have taken the 3rd piece of advice of our master. And the ex-colleague said, yes, after you left, he told us the 3rd piece of advice that was to be given you, which was, if you buy a farm, sell it and leave the country. But then there was another man who came to the master, and he was allowed to interact with those other students. He was allowed to sit in the assemblies when the master was giving the dissertations. But time passed, and he too thought that he might leave the company. And so he went to the master and was about to advise him that he was going to depart, and the master said to him, "Could you consider remaining until you are dismissed?" And the man pondered on this, and he decided to stay. He stayed with the master several more years, until the moment arrived when the master called him to him and said, "Now it is time for you to depart. Would you like 3 pieces of advice or money to sustain you on the way?" And the man said, "I will take the advice." And the master said, "The first piece of advice to you is, if there is not a need, say no. And the second piece of advice is, do not do anything in haste. And the third piece of advice is, if something is offered to you, look no further. Take it." And the man said, "I have listened and heard your advice." So then the master said to him, "Before you leave, would you like to join me in a meal, a repast before you go?" And the man pondered, and he said to the master, "I heard your first piece of advice, and I have already eaten, so I have no hunger. So I say thank you, but no thank you." "Oh," said the master, "well, perhaps if you're in a hurry to leave, you know that there's a caravan just about to leave. If you hasten down the road, you'll catch it." And the man pondered and said, "I heard your advice not to take haste. I will not follow that caravan." So the master said, "Having heeded these 2 pieces of advice, I can offer you enlightenment." And the man said, "I have listened and heard your advice, and I take what you offer." So the question that's asked of us from our experience, what is the difference, similarity, or the relationship between these 2 Sufi stories? The difference. the similarity and or the relationship between these two tales. Is there a difference, similarity or relationship between non-reaction and listening? Is it the same place?
Yeah. It's the emptiness. Non-reaction requires that one has, one rests in that. And real listening is the same.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing. The desires are no longer there of the world that would, be in the way. So the true listening is there.